Hello everyone and welcome to the latest IGB webinar run today in partnership with LexisNexis Group. I'm Laura Gambrell, Commercial Content Executive here at Clarion Gaming. Before I hand over to our moderator for today, Christina Thakor-Rankin, I just wanted to run you through some housekeeping notes. First, today's session will be recorded, so will be available to watch on demand and shared shortly after today's broadcast. We will also be taking questions, which you can enter in the GoToWebinar interface on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, without further ado, over to you, Christina.
Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, wherever you are. The title of this session today is Non-Compliance is a Loser's Game. And those of you who are currently operating within Europe, and in particular the UK, will be very, very aware of this. In 1 month alone, the regulator has issued almost £15 million worth of fines. For any operator operating within a regulated space, compliance is becoming more and more important. Not just a bottom line revenue in terms of avoiding sanctions and fines, but also from a reputational perspective. Now we know that quite often operators will see sanctions or fines as simply a cost of doing business. Increasingly, a number of operators, knowing that regulation moves relatively speedily in some jurisdictions, are waiting to see what the regulation is before they start to take action. Those of you who are operating within Europe, but also parts of the US now, will be all too acutely aware that when an operator is sanctioned, it is not in accordance with what they will be doing in the future. It is historically what they were doing at the time that the compliance audit took place. So for those of you who are asking yourselves, why should we bother doing anything right now when there is new regulation on the horizon? When in the UK, we're talking about things like single customer view. When in new emerging markets, whether it's Europe or the US, we have regulators who are constantly evaluating and assessing. The message is loud and clear. When the regulator comes to visit, they will not be looking at you to see what you are doing, knowing the regulator is coming. They will be looking at what you have done historically. What that means for all of you is not what does the next 6, 12, 18 months look like. It is about what you are doing today. And if you are not compliant today, at some point further down the line, this will come back and hit you. So without further ado, it gives me huge pleasure to introduce a panel of a vast spectrum of experience. We have everybody here. We have the operator perspective, we have the pan-operator perspective, and we also have the technical perspective. So rather than introduce the panelists myself, I'm going to ask them to give a very short introduction to themselves, who they are, what they do, and how their experience is relevant for this session. So starting off with you first, Adam.
Hey, thanks, Tina. So my name's Adam Doyle. I've worked in this space now for about 14 years. Currently, I am head of gaming at Trunarrative of LexisNexis. Previous to that, I was at GB Group heading up the game for about 9 years, and I took time out to go onto the operator side as a sales director for Beat.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Fiona, over to you.
Thanks, Tina. So I'm Fiona. I'm currently head of compliance and MLRO at Aspire Global. Worked in gaming now for longer than I would like to mention. Previous to that, I've always been in financial crime and anti-money laundering. So the two go hand in hand very nicely.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And last but by no means least, Ali.
Thanks, Tina. So, yeah, my name's Ali. I'm the head of regulatory compliance at Amber Gaming. I've been working in this field, I think, probably just as long as Adam has been, so 12 years, so he's on the operator side. So I'm now working on the consultancy side. So a bit of a poacher, not turned gamekeeper, more like observer, I think is how I would describe it. So taking, I think, some of my years of experience of working as an MLRO, director of compliance across various sort of companies and different sort of regulatory frameworks, and working here in the consultancy for Amber Gaming. And sort of what we do here is regulatory compliance and consultancy services, where we look at training, compliance, consultancy, licensing and assurance frameworks across multiple jurisdictions.
Fantastic. So I'm sure you will agree, we have got a huge amount of experience, skill and wisdom. And all three individuals have been very generous in offering to share what they know. So let's dive straight into it. As a practicing compliance officer in MLRO myself, I'm finding that it's becoming a little bit like constantly chasing our tail. It's like painting the fourth bridge. So I'm going to start with you, Fiona, as somebody who I think I connect with probably the closest in terms of your perspective. Your job is to keep the operator safe. What, in your view, are the biggest challenges faced by a compliance officer or MLRO right now? Or to put it another way, what are the things that are keeping you awake at night, right?
Okay. I think where we struggle as operators at the moment is with our continuous monitoring, which is closely followed by record keeping. I think we are now in a place where we've got the data, we monitor things like deposits, withdrawals, velocity, gaming behaviour, but we need to up this a bit more now, and we need to start delving into what that data means. What does it do? What are we doing with it afterwards? We've become very good at mapping out the regulation now, but it's what we do with it. It's not just a tick box procedure anymore. We need to make sure that we're not only looking at the basics of, as we've just mentioned, deposits, withdrawals, velocity, but also changes in behaviour, because that can have a huge effect on safer gambling as well as spotting suspicious behaviour. Very soon we're going to see changes from the Gambling Commission, and they want us to really enhance our customer interactions, and this will go alongside how we use our technology. We're going to see big changes in the access that regulators have to our data, and this will all be about preventing gambling harm. But what we do need to remember is it not only protects the player, it protects the business as well.
So from your perspective, it's not just doing what the regulation requires you to do. From a regulatory risk perspective, it is increasingly about the reputation of the business. And if the reputation starts to suffer, then obviously that is going to have an impact on the bottom line. Exactly. And just to kind of touch on what you said, that if I understand you correctly, this is no longer a box ticking exercise. This is about your teams taking a much more holistic view when it comes to managing customers. It's not just looking at behaviour, it's not just looking at data. It's looking at absolutely everything.
I mean, something that I say a lot, and I probably bore my business a lot because I repeat myself, but it's not just data, it's people, and it's people that we're looking at. And this is what I think, and it's easy in any industry to forget, but we have to constantly remind ourselves that these numbers we're looking at are actual humans, and that's why we need to improve our monitoring and improve our technology to make sure we've got the strongest data possible and that we're doing something with it.
Brilliant, thank you. Ali, I'm going to come to you next, because as you mentioned in your introduction, you offer consultative services, which means you actually get to see a number of different operators and how they do things. How much of what Fiona just said resonates with what you see?
I think resonates, in a lot when we start looking at the the challenges that are presented from safer gambling and anti-money laundering aspects of the regulation. And I think there's some interesting points there that that you raised, and I think sometimes, and I think like you said, they are humans, and it's not just points of data or looking at a screen and seeing individual sort of records on a CRM system that you're using. And I mean, I remember from my days of like wandering the floors where you had your VIP teams, things like that. You get comments sort of thrown going, oh, this customer has only lost X or only lost Y, and you sort of wonder that over time, having spent so long in the industry, has there sort of been a desensitization towards the value of money that people are looking at when they're looking at a screen and seeing that a customer has lost 300, 400, 500, 600, £1,000. I mean, I remember pulling people up saying, well, could you afford to lose that amount of money in a day to try and get them to relate and understand? So, and I think there's that sort of a disconnection as well in that sort of understanding, because they're working for a business. The business is about making money. That's the whole premises of having an online gambling business. So this desensitization issue, I think, it's a hidden sort of thing where people don't necessarily have that sort of value or sense. But where we look at where fines are being issued, around like safer gambling or AML breaches, what I think we could all acknowledge that a lot of the times the underlying sort of behaviour in majority of these cases has been driven by a problematic sort of behaviour or an addiction, which has then resulted in an offence being committed by misappropriating funds, from either family member, company, something where an opportunity arises. And you see that sort of happening time and time again. And it's quite clear, there's a thread that goes all the way up from sort of problem gambling all the way through to an AML breach. And when you sort of sit at the top and the role of an MLRO and sort of what they do, I think a lot of the times, and what I've sort of seen is a very much siloed approach. AML is one side, safer gambling is another side, but we're at a stage now where your MLRO, for example, needs to understand the safer gambling aspects of the players that they're reviewing. It should be a red flag or trigger for them to investigate further. But at the same time, the number of times I've dealt with responsible gambling policies, looking at these, and it has purely been about a customer interaction, making sure they're gambling safely, or putting certain limits on their account, or make sure we've done the right sort of affordability assessment. But there isn't that sort of wider vision of, is there a potential AML issue here that we have missed and escalating this over? So I think, how you sort of mesh those two teams between each other and sharing of that data and information that you're referring to, Fiona, I think that is also quite critical. And I think the other side as well that we sort of see, I think, is a lot around the knowledge and the understanding. I think where you think about when you're sat in front of a regulator, I mean, like so Fiona, Christina, myself, we've all done this. We're talking to a compliance manager from the Gambling Commission, or a compliance assessor from the MGA, whatever. Our level of knowledge and our detail and understanding is incredibly high. We've had a long time in the industry developing ourselves to that point. But when we start thinking about the operations sort of below us, there's a lot more sort of migration from staff coming in, leaving, turnover, personal issues. Staff maybe being on a night out, the night before. And these are the individuals which we are placing the highest level of responsibility to protect the license, protect individual PMLs, for example, and the way in which we may approach training or imparting the knowledge that we have on these individuals, there is a disconnect there. And this is sort of when the regulator comes in, and then they start looking at your policies, procedures, you're explaining, articulating everything, and then going, great, fantastic, now let's see it in practice. Why are we always seeing a disconnect from your policy to the actual implementation and operational standing? And a lot of that resolves around the way you are training and approaching the training to these individuals, and actually looking at your operation as a risk factor.
So it sounds like what we're saying is what used to be responsible gambling over there, payments, fraud, money laundering over there, that doesn't work anymore. What we should be asking of every customer is actually the blended approach. Who are you? where does your money come from, and can you afford it? It's not one question, but actually it's three, which covers all of those bases.
Exactly. I think that's I think that's the position which we're in, because, as I said, if you look at some of the cases where funds have been misappropriated, that's how it started off. Yeah. And you will do all your customer interactions. You see, oh, we held 17 customer interactions, but there was no alert or anything raised to the MLRO for further consideration. It's a break in your process understanding, which means how do you transfer from A to B when you have specialist units, because each of those fields, AML and responsible gambling, they're specialisms in themselves. It takes years to become an expert in that within an organization.
See, that's a perfect point to kind of draw in Adam and just ask you, Adam, I mean, Fiona's talked about people. People is not technology, it's not computers. But Ali has referenced things like alerts, information, and Fiona talked about data as well. Is there technology out there currently that can actually hit all of those particular points? Because it is people looking at people.
Yeah, so we're probably at the other end, where Fiona has players keeping us at her up. We have compliance officers keeping us up and on the toes of how can you support, how can you help? So, I can't talk to the levels that they can, but I can say the things that we get questions around, there's probably two main ones. One is around global affordability solutions. So data in the UK, it's there. Everyone knows about it. There's different levels of it, but that's something which is quite easy for us. Once you're moving into the likes of European markets, that's where it becomes very challenging. It comes down to a manual process. So the things that you're looking to do then is implement the procedure, and it's trying to, payslips, proof of SOW, capturing it as easy as possible so the player doesn't go elsewhere. And then the other things that we're really seeing, both of them mentioned it, it's about transactional monitoring, deposits, withdrawals, but not just that, it's deviations, it's behavior. So it's really understanding and identifying risk. So the way that we talk about it is it's very much with, and Ali touched on it again, someone could be out on a night out. So the next day they could be a bit slow, they might miss some things that pop up. So we work with people and we try to hardwire their risk-based levels, but also the regulator's risk-based levels. So when things hit triggers, it'll either go off and use third-party suppliers, or it might be a flag there where it needs to go to the high-risk team, it needs to go to the RG team. I think the thing that we really have to look at is a lot of operators now, they are seeing a significant amount of deposits, withdrawals, bets. It's impossible to deal with it manually. It's just not going to happen, and that's why people are slipping through the gaps. And hopefully that's where technology helps.
So again, from what I'm hearing from you is technology is not a silver bullet, but it is an incredibly valuable enabler.
If used in the right areas, it can significantly reduce human error and speed up the process. But at some point, you are going to have to do things manually.
And again, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's about clever use of technology, not technology for the sake of using technology.
Exactly.
Brilliant. And can I just ask you, and we will explore this a little bit more further down the session, but would you say that the tools on the market right now are effective in kind of doing what they promise they're going to do?
So yes, but to my point, when you get into certain countries and certain areas, it's not about it being effective, it's about the lack of data in some areas.
Which is a real challenge.
Yes.
And I think that kind of takes us very nicely onto the next area I'd like to explore. And I'm going to start with Ali, because lack of data, lack of knowledge, lack of expertise seems to be a common theme when it comes to some of the sanctions and fines that regulators have been kind of issuing, whether it's a UK regulator or whether it's Sweden, whether it's the Netherlands, and increasingly the US. So Ali, based on your experience, what would you say are the most common mistakes that operators are making right now Obviously, lack of data or lack of, I guess, visibility on a player is one of the things, but that surely is only one of the things.
Yeah, so I think, you know, it's always a combination of multiple sort of factors when we go. It's never just one thing. It's, you know, it might be that actually the time and resource available to commit, you know, with the size of the business and how you are approaching your compliance is, you know, is another factor, which is probably a major sort of underlying factor within this. But when we like peel back the layers of the regulatory so public statements, and you know, we'll look across there. You have in the UK, it's safer gambling, AML. Denmark, we've started seeing AML. Now, Malta, there hasn't been much by way of enforcement, but I think, you know, still with the grey listing and the impact that this will have, you know, sort of Moneyval and the requirements for the industry sort of to start taking steps, I think we will expect to see movement in this area. Sweden, you know, you've had bonuses. You know, Netherlands, like you mentioned as well previously. So all of these things, and some of these are by big sort of household names. It's time and time again getting it wrong or not understanding, and it's wide. I mean, if we look at the UK, because I think that's where we've had the most significant activity. What strikes me consistently is the constant theme of training, learning, expertise, and assurance. Okay, and you know, where you've got training, learning, and expertise, it's not just at your lower levels; it's at senior levels where, you know, MLROs are not considering to report suspicious activities, or BRAs not maintained properly, or you know, very high financial thresholds being put into place. So where you've got mistakes or errors being made at policy level, at a senior level in itself, that is one area that senior management or board of directors need to consider. But then you also have the other issue, and that is the actual policy implementation into an operational procedure. That's a secondary issue. So you know, these sort of drivers here, you know, and I think Fiona, you mentioned it earlier about record keeping as well. These drivers here at a senior level, what you're talking about is governance, so your governance processes. And I don't fully think that, you know, the compliance industry in gambling has, you know, has embraced the governance aspect the way that they do, say, in banking or insurance or the financial sort of services. Often it's a lack of governance because you're not able to demonstrate the compliance that you know, that sticks or undoes you. When you have say your senior leadership team, you know, bringing in a money laundering reporting officer, what sort of credentials do they have to assess that this person has the right technical skill set? Because this is a specialist role in itself. How are they to understand that this person fully knows and you're about to entrust your AML framework and policy to this person? Have you got the, you know, have you hired a Formula One driver, or have you hired you know, a go-kart driver? You don't quite fully sort of understand. And it's, you know, it's what can these individuals do to improve their processes, to assess or to support or to help. You know, it's not necessarily a weakness to get additional advice or guidance in. But then in the same breath, then when you're looking at your your procedures and what are applied from an operational basis. And I think one of the things I know that kept me up awake at night a lot of the times of what was going on with my database, like what was happening. You know, you come in, you see players losing things, and going, what's going on? Why is this? What's happened, etc. And a lot of the time, that's been pretty much kind of like, you know, the horse has bolted. Now let's close the stable door, so to speak. And it's what I also found was that, you know, the time that you had for carrying out assurance exercises, dip sampling, because the business is coming at you a million miles an hour. We want to go in this jurisdiction, explore this product, bring on this marketing partner. So you've got loads of challenges that you have to undertake as part of your day-to-day sort of routines. But actually, you know, conducting your dip samples and your assurances, these sorts of things kind of fall a little bit to the wayside. And I think, you know, people do tend to neglect them. And by the time you get round to doing it or doing it consistently and documenting this and reporting back to board and go, it's sort of one big sort of massive sort of vicious circle there. And I think, well, you know, what you mentioned right at the beginning in the, you know, in the last month, or, you know, around the fines, But if we look at that in the context of things, it was 32 million was paid out across 2020, 2021. In Q1 this year, this figure stands at 20.8 million. That's just Q1. We've not even got the rest of the year. But okay, granted, you know, this is for activity sort of 2 years ago, right? And we're sort of seeing the results off of that are coming out. But we also know back in 2020, that was sort of where we saw the peak and the advancement of the regulatory sort of framework. So, you know, the next 2 years for me, I think will tell whether the industry has really sort of learned, because if the level of fine and things start sort of coming down, like you said about the reputational side, the memorandum of understanding between regulators and that 360 perimeter view now that you've got to maintain, whether this now actually sort of helps to sort of curb activities.
Well, I think there's a huge amount there. I saw Fiona nodding away there in agreement. So before I go to Adam to kind of round up and then take us into the realms of technology, Fiona, I would love to get your view on that, but also I'm going to throw in a couple of other questions which link back to the points Ali made. Something which kind of struck me with the Gambling Commission fines over the last month is one of the fines actually came with an official warning as well this time. And it's public knowledge. So 888 received a 9.4 million fine, but also an official warning. We've also had a lot more proactivity as far as PML holders go, where, you know, excuse me, the UK regulator absolutely, but some of the other regulators are now also starting to look at holding individuals accountable. And certainly, you know, one of the challenges I've had historically as a compliance officer, although I would say things are changing, is there has been a huge disconnect. As Ali mentioned, you've got the board way up there who historically have thought, well, you know, we can just point the finger at compliance or MLRO if things haven't kind of gone to plan. So they put that distance in place. I think that distance is now actually dwindling massively. So it'd be great to get your thoughts on that whole thing, you know, from the board all the way down to what Ali was talking about, the employee who perhaps has been on a night out or maybe he's just not feeling it that day.
Yeah. No, I think the points Ali made, they probably resonate with everybody on the call. In particular, you know, talking about training and culture change. I think we do jump in and we make sure all of our operational staff are trained and they're kept up to date and they have refreshers, but we sometimes forget about senior management and we sometimes forget about the board. We might be too scared to approach it, but I've seen that happen at other operators and I didn't want it to happen where I am now. So everybody gets trained equally, and you know, right from basics up to advanced level training about AML, about safer gambling. And I think it's really important because, you know, especially at board level, you know, they might be involved in so many parts of the business and maybe even other businesses at times. It's very easy for them to not be, you know, up to date with where we should be and why we're doing it. So I think that was a really valid point that Ali made there, and it's something that all compliance officers should not be afraid to tackle. And actually, you know, once you've done it, you get so much more out of it then with your day-to-day conversations. So that's something I'd highly recommend. And then with the fines, with the enforcement action, again, you know, we've got people in the business across the board that are very good at pulling everything apart, and the emails will go out and everybody will know about it and it goes out en masse. This is what's happened. But sometimes I don't think we follow up on it. Do we ever pick up the phone to our C-levels? Do we ever pick up the phone to the board and say, did you see it? What do you think? How is that going to affect us? What are we going to put in place to stop that? We go straight to operational level sometimes and we're like, right, do this. But it's so important if we all want this culture to change and for our lives to be made easier and more compliant, that it needs to start from the top and we all must work together.
Fantastic, thank you. So it's very much a case of top down.
Yeah,
brilliant. Adam, you've been sitting there listening very patiently. I'm going to say, when I kind of go in as a consultant or even just as a practicing compliance officer, one of the first things I will do is an assessment of the tools being used. As you rightly pointed out, the volume of customers we have, the volume of data, it's not possible to filter through it manually. So for me, one of the more common mistakes can be you're using the wrong tools for what you're trying to do. So it'd be great to get your thoughts on that. But also, you know, we hear increasingly about technology as an enabler, and we're also now starting to see regulators advocating technology as a kind of requirement of compliance practice. So it would be great to get your thoughts on both of those points, you know, mistakes that operators make when looking for tools and providers and suppliers, but also how can we make technology work for us better?
Yeah, so I think if we look at the mistakes, they typically come to the, we're at the back end again. So it's normally someone that's come to us who's always had a manual process, or it's someone, as you mentioned before, Tina, all they've been doing is a tick box exercise. So the common ones that we really see is it's either human error or things slipping through the gaps, thinking that they can manually monitor these people when, as we've mentioned, it's impossible. Gone are the days where it was, you know, the traditional thing. Now, not only are you monitoring players' behavior and transactions, you're having to continuously monitor their risk rating of the player. When someone starts on day one to what they are 6 months later, it can be completely different. So the one thing which we try and put down to people, it's putting together a procedure and process. Then it's putting together how you communicate with the customers and documenting that and having a full audit trail there. But that's something which are big gaps that we see at times. And again, it's really, to your point, it's really where people haven't been using technology, and it's trying to sort of make them aware of, you know, you've got a lot of staff here who are doing, you know, who are not really touching the sides of it. Well, why don't you use technology to support them? Remove the stress and hassle that they have, where they're probably working harder and longer hours than what they need to if they're bringing it in. So pulling some stuff in there that can help with them with the further due diligence, make sure that gaps are not slipping through. Then I think that the second one that I'd flag is it can be operators trying to move into new markets very, very quickly without securing technical resource or without doing their full due diligence. So they'll go into a country, they'll think they've got everything right, and they haven't. And all it's going to do, it's going to cause issues downstream later on. So the one thing which we always try and say to people, if you're looking to go into new markets, we can help them very quick. But from your side, there's a lot of investment and there's a lot of procedures that you need to put in place to make sure that you're sort of aligning with what you need to do.
That's really great. And I don't think it's any surprise to anybody on this session that, you know, you are a provider supplier. And this is not designed as a sales pitch, but one of the things you guys do is you have a number of different suppliers and providers and sources plugged into your platform. So can we just perhaps, before I move to Ali to get his experience from a range of different operators, would you say one of the first things an operator should do, rather than just dive in and pick the same tools that other operators are using, should the first step be what is it that they need for their particular business, rather than just, yeah, my nearest competitor is using ABCD, therefore I should have the same. And how do you think you can support an operator's exploration and utilization of the best tools?
Yeah, so I think the one thing we really need to, you know, and especially from when we first started off in this market many years ago, you know, technology is definitely evolving. If you use it in right areas, as we said, it can significantly help reducing manual work, removing human error, and again, stopping these big fines later down the line. I think gone are, as we discussed, gone are the days where it used to be a verification check on registration of first deposit. It's now about sort of monitoring. Yeah. It's about continuously monitoring the player through the life cycle, whether it's the risk level or the deposits, deviations, and also as well, the one which we all love talking about is players' affordability, making sure that, you know, they spend what they can afford. The one thing which I'm going to say is the biggest change in touching to your point, Tina, is one supplier isn't the answer. It's all about working in collaboration and trying to help an operator align with their requirements, not the supplier's requirement of we want as much business as possible. We currently have over 60 third-party suppliers on our platform, and we're going to continue to grow this. So this allows us to offer operators multiple suppliers throughout the player's journey. So this means that it can run multiple strategies. And this is really the way that we only see it's how an operator is going to align with regulation, because obviously the regulator asks them to do so much. So where the challenges come is if the regulator starts asking them to do something which is not available electronically. So very much, again, that's when we come to the sort of the manual process and trying to build things in there. So it's using technology to help you with data. But then, as I mentioned before, it's trying to use technology to help remove as much friction as away from a manual process. So if we look at the big development, and that's we really seen from our side, so we are trying to allow operators to run multiple strategies, such as fraud, risk, IDV, continuous monitoring, affordability via a single API. We know that one of the biggest challenges that operators have is technical resource. It's a big change in the space, in the gambling space. So we find doing that, having a unified platform really helps. Affordability, it's using multiple solutions. So I personally reckon that in a customer's journey, depending where they are, you probably need 3 to 5 different checks, depending on where they are in the life cycle, because that will depend on the levels that you need to do. You don't want to do things too early, because you might find stuff out that you don't want to know. So it's getting it where you want it in the journey at the relevant points, making sure that you're protecting yourself as an operator, but also protecting the players. And to my point before, at some point you will require a payslip, an SOW, if the player spends a significant amount of money or spends it in a certain amount of time. But it's about using that technology to remove friction and try and automate as much as possible. But at some point you are going to have to do stuff. Other things, document capture, making it as smooth as possible for customers, increasing the match rates, helping them capture the document in the best lights, instructing the players. We all know the biggest drop-offs is typically user error or bad quality pictures. I'm sure Fiona, yourself and Ali have seen many times when people have taken a picture with a closed passport next to their head. What are you going to do with that? Or, something in a really bad light. So again, using technology, SDKs out there, which is a really smooth process. And I think finally, we've all mentioned it, it's speed to market. So, or easily amending previous scores of rules. So where we've seen with the likes of COVID, where new rules were put by the UKGC and they were expected to change quickly, this is something that we're really focusing on to help operators. It's, like I said, it's helping to change with COVID when they expected things to change very quickly, or helping them with a new market, getting into a new market or align with regulation. So by doing this, we can really ensure operators can be confident that they're aligning with the new rule changes or the new risks. And if we can do that with new markets, it might give them a bit of a competitive advantage with the speed to the market. So if we look at what we did with the likes of the Netherlands market, we worked with the relevant supplier, we worked with the operator, and we worked with the regulator, pulling everything into one place. So, and again, not as a sales pitch, but the way that we do it is we've authored things in natural language, which means it's very easy to do it in the back office rather than being reliant on an operator's technical resource and trying to get that sort of resource allocated.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Just on the point with passports, I know people are not supposed to look like their passport picture, but I have seen some absolute shockers over the years. I'm just going to go back to Ali before I then move on to Fiona. So Ali, we've heard a lot about technology and that one does not fit all. It's to use an industry pun, it's got to be horses for courses. But in your view, is there any technology out there which can compensate for somebody with a hangover or somebody having an off day?
Oh, that I think is a $1 million question, and I think if you're able to sort of answer that, you're sort of getting, I think, now into the realms of advanced AI, where you've got machine learning, things like that, where if you start trying to look sort of down that end, essentially you'll be deploying AI on your AI around your staff, in that sort of a concept. So looking at how they've previously handled cases to how they're handling now, where they've had, if they've seen 60% of their alerts where they're treating it a certain manner, and now on this one day here, when they've had similar sort of alerts, similar parameters, they are now sort of dropping down. You might want to then have alerts coming off to say like your relevant management or units just to investigate, to look in. So I think that is where ultimately where you start dealing with these huge volumes and large volumes of alerts and cases, things going on where you're not able to go in and dip sample at a wide range effectively. If you've got 50 people in your responsible gambling team, are you realistically going to look at all 50 people, every single one of their cases at the end of every single week, and then give them feedback? No, you take a proportion, but what's to say you've got the right size sort of proportion within itself? So I think that may be an interesting sort of concept of how do you deploy AI on your own sort of staff and the way in which they're handling. That could be one sort of example. But I think as well, just put on a couple of points that Adam had raised, that I thought was really sort of important, and that is how you as a compliance officer or individuals treat or view sort of technology, and that is not to be afraid of it. It's actually, and like I said, enabler, not disabler. And I know why, because as a compliance individual, you have your realm of control. You feel comfortable when you have seen it, put your own eyes on it, touched it, felt it, breathed it, kind of thing. And when it starts going via machines or going via third parties, you feel like, okay, what do I do? How do I ensure that it's sort of working correctly? And I think by having the right sort of vendor assessment program, because I think when we were coming through, there's only maybe 1 or 2 or 3 sort of providers. Now there's a myriad there. So not plumping for the first shiny thing going, oh, tick, this is what I want, and bring this in. We're going to the right sort of vendor assessment program, also understanding your business from a technology perspective, because one of the main bottlenecks to compliance is getting development time to integrate a solution. And I think that's something wonderful, which I think what Adam and his company and service sort of provide is that they provide that one integration or one-stop sort of shop for that, where you've got multiple sort of plugins, which takes a huge sort of lead off, especially when you have commercial pressures to deliver or integrate the next generation of games or integrate this new CRM tool, or when how do you get that priority in there to say, well, this is affecting responsible gambling. And by the time they integrate, do all of these things, sometimes the wave has sort of gone past. You lost 2-3 months, and you're operating in a manual sort of sphere or scope. So I think picking the right technology, not being afraid, and yeah, I mean, depending upon sort of the answers that are there, and risk analysis and a risk-based approach to your processes, what can be automated, and the higher risk items is what you keep back for Mark 1 eyeball.
Brilliant, thank you. And one of the things you touched on there is check the checkers. You should be monitoring, and you should be just checking that your staff are as effective as executing your policies, your practices, your processes as you think they are. I mean, I'm known as Lady Voldemort because I send my own teams fake documents and then see who can spot them. But just before we move to questions, I've seen 1 or 2 come through. Fiona, again, you've been sitting there listening, and I've seen you nodding a lot to some of the points Adam and Ali have made. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, just a quick couple of points, really. So just really, going back to Adam's point about automations and use of technology, and agreeing with Ali that, we shouldn't be afraid. I have found that, mentioning the word automations can cause panic within companies. I don't know why, I don't get it, but it can. And I think it's important to know that, with things like, we've laughed about it, but somebody with a hangover or somebody having a bad day, automations are great then, because going back to the analogy of being able to sleep at night, at least as compliance, that you've got bases covered if you've got a really good automatic technology, data matrix, whatever you want to call it, set up that covers a scope of players on a daily basis and staff. And then, as we've said, the real high risk things are something we can jump on and get eyes on. And then just very quickly talking about suppliers, and Adam and I have talked about this a lot, they need to be much more transparent with what they do, because what happened, especially when affordability first blew up, and Adam and I saw this a lot, is that everybody could do everything. Everybody could solve the problem. But then when you start digging a bit deeper with your own research, you realise that, well, one company could do this, another company could do that, Adam's company could do everything, of course. But you know, it's naughty really, because sometimes, you know, you don't know what you're signing up for. You think you're signing up for something that's going to help, and there needs to be more transparency. And that's why, as peers, we need to talk more, collaborate more, and be open and honest on who we're using, not hide it away, not say, oh yeah, we're all right, we can't mention that. Let's just be open and honest and say, yeah, I use these, I've spoken to these are good, these, and I think we will all be in a better place then.
Brilliant. And I'm going to stay with you, Fiona. So interesting question. Based on everything we've talked about then, in your experience as somebody who is responsible for ensuring regulatory compliance for an operator, what does good look like?
It looks like preparation. It looks like a prepared and organised team. It looks like knowledge, and I think Ali's touched on that point a lot today, and that's knowledge from every part of the business, not just the AML team, not just the RG team. Everybody in the business has to be on board, and that is how we as an operator will look good. If we've built strong relationships with the regulators, you know, we don't want to be scared to talk to them. We should be talking to them more and more and more as we possibly can, so we are working together and not against each other. And we all know some regulators are better at it than others, but it's up to us to force that relationship sometimes and be a little bit pushier. And then obviously we've got the technology aspect, and I truly believe that with the right technology it can ease our compliance obligations, because it makes things a lot more streamlined, and it makes the record keeping easier, the monitoring easier, and then all in all it protects the players and the business. And for me, that's where it starts.
Fantastic. And I think you also touched on one of the other questions we've had come through, so I'm going to wrap the two together. What does good look like? But when you're looking for the right partner, what are you actually looking for? Ali, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think when we say, you know, compliance partner, I think, you know, that is quite a broad, you know, sort of spectrum there. So are you looking from a consultancy basis, you know, to help give you guidance on your processes, procedures, the level of experience, you know, what is the qualifications of an individual, the background at the positions that they've held, you know, understanding these, having discussions with them, testing their knowledge, you know, where you know the answers or the thoughts to certain things, to extract that information to see, you know, do they have an understanding semblance? Because anyone can call themselves a consultant these days and provide advice, but is it the right advice? You know, because a lot of the time you sit and you go, well, I'm paying for this, or I'm, you know, going to a specialist. You are going to believe that that person is providing you the correct advice in return. If you're looking at things like technology, I think I mentioned it previously, you know, the right sort of vendor assessments. So assessing the vendor, and Fiona, what she said, you know, about the parts of not overselling and under delivering from a functionality perspective. So you understand what are your requirements before you go in. What is your challenge you're trying to solve from a procedures or compliance, it's a technical basis. What do you want to sort of unlock with this? How does this, you know, compliance toolkit or partner that you're bringing in solve those problems? You know, so you've got your MVP list sort of within that, as in your must-haves, and what are your desirables? You're not going to find, you know, the perfect solution for everything, but it's also about going out to multiple tools out there and finding out what is the best fit for yourself before you then engage in contracts.
And I think Ali, sorry Tina, just going back to Ali's point, I think all of that is about having that preparation. So like you say, making sure if you're working with a consultant that they have got the knowledge that you need, that's going to support you with your business, and not being afraid, as we've spoken about, you know, working with senior management, working with the board, not being afraid to ask those questions.
And I think some of the stories I've heard, and I say story, probably rumour is a more accurate definition, but you do hear these stories where operators bring in external advisors, consultants, solicitors, providers, and actually they end up in a worse situation because they picked the wrong partner. And I have known from personal experience that if you pick the wrong technology partner, not only will it go badly with the regulator, it's also not going to fly with the financial director, because you paid for a solution that actually isn't worth the money you paid for. So Adam, in your view, what does good look like? And when you're looking for a partner, what should you think about?
Yeah, I suppose if I say what do I think looks good from the supply side, I believe as suppliers we should be far more involved with the regulators, especially when they're either creating or amending regulation. You know, we know what technologies out there, we know what data or technologies coming. So I think by doing this, it can not only help the regulator, it can help the operators, and it can ensure as well that there's not some little surprises coming down the road for the operator where it's virtually impossible for them to do this other than stop the process, stop the player journey, and the players are not going to be happy themselves. So, and again, by doing that, we're going to reduce the bad press. That's the one thing I think where we're seeing bad press again. It's from where suppliers and regulators, we probably could have had a lot more involvement. And again, we could have said, oh, you can't do that, or rather than doing that, let's put that in place. In regards with partners, it's I suppose again a bit like Ali said, it's the $1 million question. The way that we look at it is that not one partner, as I mentioned, will fit all. It's trying to bring in the ones and trying to sort of align the different bits. It's like you'll have, whether it's with data providers or document providers, they'll all have their own little sweet spot. There's nothing that they're going to be perfect on. So it's trying to use the different ones at the different areas. So as I mentioned before, don't think that one supplier is going to fix everything. It's not. I would say in each market, you probably need 7 to 9 different providers.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm conscious time is getting on, so we're coming up to almost the hour. Just before we cut to final thoughts, and the one thing that you would say operators should take away from this session, if they take away anything. Going to sneak in one final question because you all touched on it, but I think it's very pertinent right now. We operate in a very saturated competitive industry, and there is that constant kind of push-pull between commerce and compliance. And a question which I know I face regularly, you generally have senior teams, management teams, pushing for profit, and there's this kind of perception that compliance is going to impact on commercial success. How do we convince management that actually compliance makes commercial sense? Fiona, you struggle with this on a daily basis as a compliance officer.
Yeah, I think it's going back to what we've talked about a lot today, which is really working well with your C-levels and your board members to make sure that they are knowledgeable, that they aren't just thinking, okay, profit, 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 that they fully are on board and understand what it means and what the repercussions are, not just showing them a headline and then they'll just go and do something else. It's making sure that they understand what it means and what it looks like. So that means communication, that means picking up the phone, that means sending them a message, not just sending them an email and hoping that they've read it. Creating meetings, monthly meetings, weekly meetings, whatever it is that you feel as an officer you need, and how much their level of interest in compliance is. And that would be, to me, the best starting point to get that culture.
Fantastic. Ali, you work for an advisory and your job is to sell compliance. How do you go about convincing senior teams that compliance does not equal cost?
Yeah, I think, that I think several years ago would have been quite sort of challenging, but I think there's a lot of evidence now in the public domain, not just with one regulator, other regulators, other industries, where they are paying attention to these sorts of things and sort of placing fines, more aggressive activity. So I think in that sort of instance, the time to smell the coffee has sort of really approached our industry in that aspect. So I think you have a whole sort of wealth of past public statements that you can draw upon and demonstrate within that. And I think on top of that as well, it's about speaking with the right individuals, gauging what their tone and their approach is towards the field of compliance, and essentially sort of course correcting and educating them. Because again, it boils back down to that lack of knowledge, the lack of knowledge of the severity of not complying with what is a license condition or what is an operating requirement, and what does that mean? Because a lot of the times they won't know the difference between one or the other. And I think, and that is where the compliance officers need to be delivering, I think, that education at the right sort of levels there, so that they understand that if it's their PML or if it is sort of for the organisation, the role, the responsibility. And how do you draw this in? I think Fiona, you mentioned this, with the meetings and things. So it's about getting the right governance processes in place to have your compliance committees, whether you start off with operational and wider strategic ones, because you have to determine what technology you need to bring in, where your challenges are, things like that, which are decided by the C-level, prioritizing the integration of technology, or if you need to hire additional staff, making sure that the HR team are there on board to hire. If you need additional desk space, all of these things are then, you have at a higher level there. And then on a more day-to-day, the operational meeting. So forums to review player activity, make sure the right checks have been done, translating that into your training materials, conducting that on the assurance side of things, and feeding this sort of back into those and up into the higher businesses. And then from the top down is where you start building that culture and that cycle.
Brilliant, thank you. And Adam, final thoughts from you in terms of, when I go to the finance team, they generally pass out the thought of paying for one provider, never mind a suite of tools. How do we convince management it is a cost-effective measure, it's a valuable investment?
Yeah, we know, I think, as suppliers in the compliance market, we know that we're classed as a tax. If regulation wasn't there, they wouldn't even answer the phone or emails to us. So one thing which we always say is compliance is here and it's only going to get stricter, so embrace it. And I think that's the first bit. It's as simple as that. Technology and data is out there, and as we've discussed, if it's used in the right areas, it can significantly reduce the challenges that compliance officers, the team, are seeing with manual stuff, worrying about, oh, did we check this player? Oh, did he spend too much? So I think that's the main one. And then, as I said before, collaboration. By using multiple suppliers, it does significantly bring the cost down. Suppliers are no longer competing against each other, trying to get as much money as possible. By using multiple ones, it's something where they realise they sharpen the pen, because they know within such and such there's another 6 or 7 suppliers. So it does actually bring the cost down, and again, it allows you to use the right technology for the right bits where they have their own little sweet spot.
Fantastic, and that's a wonderful place to finish. We are now up to the full hour, so we are out of time. A huge thank you to Adam, Ali and Fiona for being so generous in sharing their insight, their experience, their knowledge. And those of you who do hire consultants, you got a lot of value for your money here this evening or afternoon or morning. This webinar has been brought to you by LexisNexis, and as you can see on the screen, they will be at ICE. Hopefully you will all be at ICE too. I know the panelists will be, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you.
Thanks.
And that's everything for today. So just to wrap up, thank you so much to LexisNexis for making today's session possible, and to Adam Doyle, their representative on the panel. Thanks also goes to our incredible moderator, Christina, and to Fiona and Ali for their expert insights. And of course to Erin from Clarion's ops team, who handled the technical side of today's broadcast. Remember, today's session has been recorded, so it will be live on IGB shortly to watch again and share. This is our final webinar before ICE London kicks off, starting with Icebox from the 11th of April, with the full show opening its doors from the 12th of April. So we hope to see you all there. Thanks again, everyone, and have a lovely rest of your day.